Now we come to our media picks of the month. And this month I'm intrigued because, somewhat predictably, he says with a wry smile, you've gone for something that a theme, as it were, that you are known to have a penchant for, i.e., 20th century conflict, namely the Second World War. But in this instance, it sounds as though there are elements of the format that are particularly interesting, if not a little bit controversial. I'm of course talking about BBC2's Rise of the Nazis. So can you explain to me, and also our viewer at home, what's good, what's bad, why should we watch this?
Right. Rise of the Nazis is, it could be on any digital channel near you. The old joke about UK TV Hitler. Putting Nazis or Hitler in a TV series is a known audience winner. However, there's a perfectly reasonable reason for this documentary to be coming out now. It's the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of World War II in Europe, and this is a flagship commission by the BBC, Britain's national broadcaster. It is a co-production. It is made in Lithuania with money from the Lithuanian Film Development Organisation. The format is interesting. It is a series of very well filmed, costumed reconstructions, but the actors concerned don't speak any dialogue. Instead, you have an all-seeing narrator in the BBC version, the British actress Kate Fleetwood, telling the story, and then various talking heads, one of whom is Sir Richard Evans, one of our greatest living historians and a specialist in the Nazi period, but also people who've got a connection with the characters they're describing the actions of. So, for example, you have Baroness Helena Kennedy QC talking about the German lawyer Hans Litten, who put Hitler on the witness stand in a trial when he was prosecuting 4 Nazi stormtroopers for attacking communist activists in a nightclub.
Oh, I see. This isn't familial connections. This is lived experience connections.
Absolutely, that's the interesting thing about it. They're trying to relate it to the lived experience of modern experts in a particular field. So in her case, it's the law. And another one, the actions of the German army and senior German army officers are interpreted by General Sir Mike Jackson, who was retired now, but he was the head of the British Army. And in terms of talking about what soldiers do in a highly politicized environment, one of the things he's most famous for is during the invasion of Kosovo, he was told to take Pristina Airport and hold it for the NATO troops that were crossing the border. There happened to be Russian troops there whose attitude was somewhat ambiguous. And Jackson said to his American commander, "I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to start World War III."
Right.
In other words, this is somebody who'd had to take decisions which could have had incredibly far-reaching implications in a very politicized environment as a soldier. So he does have something to bring to the party.
And so in that sense, it differs from a purely historical narrative where you might, in a sentence, say the order was not followed through. You actually have here the reasoning, and you have, I suppose, someone who has to take responsibility for that action instead of just commenting.
He'll say things. Some people say, well, the pressures on somebody in that situation are, that kind of thing. Rather than just a straight. So the historical interpretation is not being done by traditional talking head historians or by traditional filmed interviews of participants.
Okay.
But where this is has been controversial, certainly in the British media and in the Twitter sphere, is one of the talking heads they're using in next week's episode, and there are 3 episodes altogether, one of which went out this week, and there's 2 more to come, is Ash Sarkar, who is most known as an activist and journalist with Novara Media. She's a left-wing activist, and her role is to describe the role of the German left, and particularly the German Communist Party, in the political conflict in Germany in the run-up to Hitler becoming Chancellor in 1933, and the taking power in 1933. and that's been controversial because they said, what does she know is the effect. I think there's an element of a number of things. First of all, she's a woman and a woman of colour, and then she's an activist and part of a controversial news organisation, which, on its website it makes no bones about the fact it's a left-wing organisation, but a lot of people see Novara Media as less a news outlet than a propaganda outlet. So
it's worthwhile just because it pertains to the point here being made. So for example, on the YouTube channel, they describe themselves, Novara Media describes themselves as being new media for a different politics. Weekly videos and live streams bringing you the best comment, debate, analysis, etc. on the left. Support the work, our work here at novaramedia.com. But also actually on if you go to novaramedia.com, there is a slightly bigger about section, and again, I'm only going into this because I think it's probably important just to highlight. Novara Media is an independent media organisation addressing the issues that are set to define the 21st century, from a crisis of capitalism to racism and climate change. Within that context, our goal is a simple one: to tell stories and provide analysis shaped by the political uncertainties of the age, elevating critical perspectives that you're unlikely to find anywhere else. So they have an agenda, they have a perspective, but crucially, so did communist activists in the 1930s. I think that's the thing, isn't it? So I can understand why people would criticise this, but frankly, part of me thinks the BBC must be doing something right if they get to annoy. They manage to annoy everyone in some way, don't they? People on the left think that they're too right wing, or in the pocket of the Conservatives, as it were. People on the right think that they're too sympathetic to left wingers like Novara Media. So it's interesting to see, again, lived experience. If you've got an officer who would have to live with the repercussions of his actions talking, then it makes sense to have someone who's on a perceived political fringe as well.
That's the point. And I think also there's another element to this, which is to do with current politics. I think there's a sensitivity with this programme coming out now. Some people, particularly on the political right, are seeing it as left-wing propaganda. They're saying, they're implying that the political right now are like Nazis, and we're on the edge of a rerun of the 1930s. Now, we can argue about that for a long time. We could do an entire watching brief on that. It is certainly the case that right-wing ideas, and even ideas that were thought to have been discredited, like race science, are creeping back into mainstream and even academic discourse at the moment. I'm currently reading
a previous segment, of course, this month.
Exactly, and I'm currently reading Angela Saini's book Superior about that very subject, and I highly recommend it. It was almost my media this month, in fact. So this is a very live story, but I think stepping back from that, I think it's perfectly legitimate to criticise the format. For me, it's Stop with the Prostate. It looks very good. It's shot like a film. If anyone watched Babylon Berlin, it's like a low-budget version of that in part.
Okay.
But again, it was shot on location in Lithuania. It's moody. It's these two great-coated officers talking in a sort of misty woodland sort of glade.
Almost noirish by the sound.
That's very. It's got a very noirish feel to it, which, given the subject matter, is actually quite. And also, if anyone's watched any German expressionist films, the way light is used, light and shadow and things like that. Really, so it's a classy production. It's the pacing slightly odd. It's a slow unroll of a narrative, as though that they felt that it needs that kind of gravitas. That may change in the forthcoming 2 episodes, but we went from the end of World War I to 1933 in the first episode.
Right.
So there was a lot of ground to cover, but it was done in a way that you could argue was slow enough for the harder thinking to keep up with. I don't argue that. I think, but it just felt a little bit underpowered in narrative terms at points. But it's, as I say, it looks good. The talking heads do bring something to the party that wouldn't be there if it was just traditional historians. Now, it's also been criticised for being a bit ponderous and not as nimble and approachable as some of the budget documentaries that you get on things like UK TV history. UK TV Hitler used to be jokingly. There's a current one showing called Hitler's Most Wanted, where they've taken the gimmick of the deck of cards of the war criminals that the Americans issued in Iraq, and they're applying that to the Nazi hierarchy. And you've got 4 historians sitting around a table discussing and a bit of location filming. It's been done on a budget. They only sent one person off on location for a start, and everybody else sits in a studio set and but it's an interesting, it's an approachable way of dealing with the subject, and other people have compared it unfavourably with Jeremy Isaac's series The World at War from the 1970s, which is really still the gold standard of World War II documentaries. But I think what that criticism misses, and what this programme is trying to deal with, is that when Isaacs made The World at War for ITV in the 1970s, they could talk to senior generals, Montgomery and co. They could talk to senior politicians who'd been there in the room at the time of Munich, and so on. You can't do that now. All those individuals are dead. That we're down to the last 4 Battle of Britain aircrew at the time of recording, and the youngest of them, I think, is 99. So that lived experience is gone for filmmakers unless it's been recorded previously. So the language, the vocabulary, the tools available to film documentary makers working on documentaries about World War II now have changed forever. And I think this is a way of trying to move the form on as well, from away from that idea of talking heads who were there as eyewitnesses into something that of necessity is reporting and analysis.
And so it sounds as though, I mean, as you say, there are other formats. One of those would be to insert a sense of jeopardy here and there. For example, hunting something or finding something, or whatever.
You mean the fake history documentaries like Hunting Hitler?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, no, or frankly, or even actually, where there is legitimate history in play, they will insert.
Jamie Theakston's Secret History series on the history of that.
No, I said legitimate history in play. Where
some of those aren't bad. Not all bad.
Okay, fair enough. But the point is, you can have an objective. You can set out, and you can create a story that begins maybe in a desk-based sort of setting, looking at papers, and end up in the field and so on and so forth, and tell a story. This is another way of telling a story, by the sounds of it, in a way that emphasises how it feels and what lived experience would have been, and presumably, and again, I imagine probably quite effectively, especially if it's annoying people, right or left leaning, presumably making it real. In some way for people.
I think so. I think what this is doing more than anything, and this is the point I'll finish on really, it's the big story and the big themes for a general audience, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, and I suppose in that sense, just it comes back to the vital reason to have other voices than historians.
Yes.
Yeah, because the other human stories, other human perspectives, and something which has that flavour that isn't quite so. Because also there is a certain, especially if you're a professional historian writing in a certain way, there is a certain desire to have a certain objectivity or a way of talking that someone who, again, is from Novara Media simply won't have. So interesting. It also connects to, and we'll link to below, an article from I think the Telegraph this month.
Yes.
Which it was I think it was an opinion piece really in the Culture TV.
It is an opinion piece. Yes.
Written by Chris Harvey, that says, why doesn't television believe, or asks, the question, why doesn't television believe in its audience's intelligence anymore? And that's an interesting one in this context, because actually, arguably, the audience is being asked to, it's being approached in a grown-up way. Here are some people talking about the past. Here's someone you might not agree with talking about the past. watch this and consume it and think about it. So actually, arguably, this actually addresses some elements of what's in that article as well.
I think it does. It's not an easy watch. You have to concentrate. You have to listen to what people are saying.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's certainly not as bad as some other. There's an underlying criticism or an underlying reason for some of the criticism too, and it is tied to current politics.
Mm-hmm.
In mischievously, because there's absolutely no connection made in the program whatsoever with current politics.
No.
Anyway, but people point out it's coincidental that people are talking about the rise, making programs about the rise of the Nazis, when we're seeing the rise of the far right in America, in Europe, arguably in Britain. That the far right is becoming more inflated, and in fact, some far right ideas have become more normalised. It is argued.
Yeah, well, it's also I mean it's definitely arguable that we're seeing parliamentary conventions, for example, ridden roughshod over in a similar way to what we saw in 1930s Europe. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, only a few days ago we had a government minister giving a TV interview suggesting that the government might not obey the law, which is unprecedented.
For administration not to obey parliamentary law.
And again, to be fair, they seem to have rowed back on that since, but it created real waves when that interview went out last Sunday.
Yeah. Okay, so interesting, and hopefully, as I say, something to engage with in a grown-up way, which is good.
I mean, it's available on BBC iPlayer at the moment for people that have access to it. The next episode goes out next week, and I'm sure it's going to be sold around the world. So look out for it. It's not perfect, but worth a watch.
Okay, excellent. My media pick for the month is not a TV show. It's not a film. It's not any other sort of consumable medium. Rather, this is a computer game. This month, I am
Quelle surprise!
Fascinated by Quelle surprise. I don't know.
How many times have you reviewed a media pick, Mark?
Many times.
And how many times have I reviewed a computer game?
No times. But nonetheless, media is an amorphous term, and
absolutely. I'm not knocking it in the slightest.
And in this instance,
I wish I had time to play computer games. While we've been recording this, our son's been busy on the PS4.
Well, the Archaeo gaming. If you want a reason to play for professional reasons, and in this instance, I've been fascinated by a release on PC, a game that will be released later on in the year on consoles, Xbox and PS4, I think, in December, and that is Ancestors: The Humankind Odyssey, and I'll link to the official gameplay launch trailer below. And from there, it's possible to find gameplay footage, etc. But the reason that I'm interested in this is, on the one hand, it had a tag that got my interest, and that is that this is coming from one of the people who created the Assassin's Creed franchise, a historically based set world.
And in fact, the last two in particular, the one that's set in ancient Egypt and the one that's set in ancient Greece, have been the modelling of the environments and so on has been the kind of standard that they've been transferable to educational use. They're wonderful looking games, very deeply researched.
Yeah, I think I highlighted the Assassin's Creed Origins was had an attachable element to the software that was specifically to highlight for educational purposes what was happening in the environment. And actually, also recently, interestingly, the model of Notre Dame Cathedral is being used, or one of the resources that's being called upon when it comes to reconstructing Notre Dame in Paris. So yeah, they do a lot of good work in representing the past in that franchise. And so I was interested because he was one of the creators of Assassin's Creed. But Ancestors, as a game, when you start playing it, is genuinely, and in that sense I would recommend giving it a go, genuinely a thought-provoking experience of a game. It's a game that invites you to act as a hominid, around about 10 million years ago initially, and you're invited to try and compete, as it were, with the timeline of human evolution. Can you evolve quicker than Homo sapiens did? Is one of the ways that they get you to start playing the game. But crucially, there's no language. There's no real explanation of anything. In fact, they say to you on screen, you get an on-screen prompt that says, "We're not going to tell you anything. Good luck." That's basically exactly what it says. And I was like, yeah, whatever, yeah, you say that, but there'll be there's not prompts or anything. There's a couple of little things that say what buttons do. So there's a button that's all about using your intelligence, so looking around and memorizing things. So you can pick maybe something to memorize and go over and investigate it. There's a button that's using your senses, so hearing or smell or standing up and looking around. There are buttons that you can start to use for actions, so picking up and putting down initially. But then as you play, the game kind of molds itself through your experiences. It actually describes it as you developing neurons in a brain, whereby I recently, for example, developed the ability, and this is obviously in the game, I stress, the ability to pass an object from one hand to another. Now that sounds small, but once you can do that, then you can suddenly start hitting things together.
Presumably you start with an opposable thumb.
Exactly. Well, actually, it's interesting. We are starting with basically an equivalent of a chimp. We're starting with that kind of level of hominid, something which has opposable thumbs, which has a certain cultural complexity, it seems. Certainly is calling out, and actually you can develop your presumably moving towards the idea of developing language by expressing and by calling out in different situations and scenarios. And one of the things that you're also invited to do, actually, is it says as a prompt when you pause the game, is think about how you would show a hominid how to become Homo sapiens. Now, from an anthropological perspective, or an evolutionary anthropological perspective, I have problems with that, in so much as a creature 10 million years ago wasn't thinking, I need to become a Homo sapien. They weren't aiming for anything, they were just evolving. No. So there's, but you have to have objectives if you're playing the game. But it's interesting. It's really interesting to have these gameplay mechanics that are deployed, for example, in RPGs like Skyrim or whatever, where you get better at something as you do it. But that's expressed in numbers on a stats screen. You get to see that when you pause the game. In this instance, you're not really seeing how your stats, inverted commas, are altering, but you're feeling it. And as you interact with other creatures, you start to, again, without language at this stage, you are enacting evolution. It's a brilliant experience. It really is.
So it sounds absolutely intriguing. But I mean, for example, though, number of questions spring to mind. But immediately, do you have the experience of, for example, your evolutionary line coming to an end because you're predated by a passing leopard?
Yes. Yeah. So there's some specific things. So for example, if you jump, as I did in one instance, there was a female that I was playing as, and she had a child on her back, and we were climbing up the side of a waterfall, and I was looking for another type of rock. I wanted to see what would happen if I bashed two rocks together, two different types. And I accidentally jumped off the top of the waterfall. There was nothing for me to grab onto. I just went on the floor. Now, what's interesting is when your character dies, and I've seen this expressed in other reviews. I don't think this is a review just yet. I think I'll be reviewing this at some other point. But in reviews, as these being disposable apes, because actually and I guess from a species perspective, each of us is in that sense, I guess, disposable. We are moving together through collective experiences towards and away from
and of course we in the fields of early hominids, we now know that there were a number of separate lines of homo which became extinct
for various reasons. And so in this instance, if you so she died, and then I was as it were transferred to a young male who was by the river looking a bit confused. Now, he actually had not developed, I hadn't gone through the rigmarole of developing this skill of passing things from one hand to another. And this really highlighted as well the fact that individual experience, which is something that I'm interested in theoretically speaking, in terms of what we can see in the archaeological record. Individual experience is not something that your species immediately benefits from. So actually, when the next generation comes along, and I'm yet to actually play this, but my understanding is you get to lock in. You get to choose a couple of things that will lock in terms of experience, but you don't get to keep everything that you've done. So the next generation may well have. So, for example, sorry, I should say, I went on with this female before she jumped off I made her jump off a waterfall. I had actually made a very crude pointy stick, so I'd hit a stick and made it into something that I could poke things with. But this new chimp, or this new hominid rather, sorry, didn't have that capacity. So I had to go off and try and do that again with him. And it's really hard to put into words again because there's not really words in the game. There's not really but when you're seeing your fellow hominids, for example, maybe fall foul of a poisonous frog, and you've just learned that actually this plant over here, when I eat it, or when your hominid eats it, you get certain things happening on the screen. And again, it's not language, so you get symbols that indicate, broadly speaking, through color or through like a sudden emanation of a bubble of color or something on the screen. It indicates that maybe this has made you warmer inside, or this has helped to heal a broken bone. So you're playing almost instinctually, and I think that's really again, as an experience, as a computer game experience, an expression of how evolution works. It is fascinating, and the fact that it's because I often do a lot of thinking about how it is that, how did I think before I knew to talk, if that's what I mean. How does my dog think? How does he express and think about the world around him? And so doing this, playing this like this, you start to feel actually that this creature is not less intelligent, but they just don't have the same capacities necessarily. Necessarily. So yes, that you have developed now, and of course, I'm sure this will change over time. By the look of it, my understanding is that the culture gets more complex. That different features on the screen. There's a symbol in the bottom right of the screen that I think has something to do with what part of the brain is being engaged at any given time. But again, it's not explained to you, and I'm sure that will probably become more explicit as your hominid gets more complex. But actually, one of the things that's really expressed in so there's the gameplay launch trailer, but there's also some other videos that are available from the company. One of the things that's expressed is that you as an individual are not the hero. You won't single-handedly lead your fellow hominids into a bright, shiny future of humankind. Rather, everyone benefits from collective experience. And as they put it, the clan is what moves. They move through the landscape. The clan will grow. The clan will benefit from one of my individual apes having jumped off a waterfall and gone splat on the ground. It's in that sense, I genuinely think it has the potential to be utterly beautiful as an experience. And to that end, I've even gone so far as to start a Twitch channel, so people can actually play. They can, if they want to, see me muddling my way through the evolution of Homo sapiensis.
Yeah, this all sounds like it could be rather wonderful. It sounds like one of those brilliant sort of left field ideas that the games industry comes up with from time to time. It's like who would have thought that one of the first successful computer strategy games would be about building a city? Not about conquering the world or anything like that, but Sim City. It's about building. It's about being creative. And the other thing this reminds me of, I think it's the kind of thing that were he still with us, the sort of late great Douglas Adams, who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, would have absolutely loved, partly because of his own involvement with the games industry and the puzzle games that he was involved in creating, but also just because of his sense of playfulness about where humans came from and where human traits came from. I remember there's a wonderful line in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where you have this really Allegedly DJ from Galactic Radio who says this is Galactic Radio talking to all sentient beings in the universe, and to everybody else, secret's to keep banging the rocks together, guys. You know. And
keep at it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it sounds fabulous. And I think you haven't mentioned the physical environments, but I would imagine, given the power, the processing power that you can put into creating an environment now, it probably looks pretty good too, I would imagine.
Well, what's interesting is that initially you start in a fairly lush valley, and again, my understanding from some of the promotional material is that it's designed so that it feels a little bit like a little haven, like an Eden, if you will.
Yeah.
But then eventually, if you don't move, if you don't adapt, the resources will run out. You'll use them up. And I haven't seen even any of this for myself, even a hint of this for myself. But my understanding actually is that the world is in fact quite extensive. It's quite large, even by some open world game standards today. So I think there will be scope for your hominid to explore, expand, much as hominids did from Eastern Africa and further out.
Are you aware yet? May not be, but is there a multiplayer angle to this? So, for example, can your clan then start interacting with other clans as the game develops and maybe more the population increases?
Who knows? I think at this stage it seems to be a single player experience only. But I would be astonished if either as an add-on to this or in a subsequent game if there wasn't an element of that. I think it's the ability to use some of these same feelings and apply that to meeting a new hominid or the equivalent of Homo sapiens meeting Homo neanderthalensis.
Yeah,
and having to try and communicate, for example, having to try and decide: are we going to attack those people? Are they a threat? All of that. This is rife for that. I think in the future as it develops. I suppose the headline for me, really, though, from this is that at the moment, what I'm finding most interesting, and I'll probably restart the game actually when I do start streaming on Twitch, probably towards the end of this week. But it's the fact that you're learning to learn. That's what I find most interesting about this.
Yeah.
Normally, and especially in modern games, there's a tendency to have a hand-holding tutorial in particular. Something that says, press this to do that, and then combine these things to achieve this. That's not happening here. What happens is you are having to learn the... well, it feels literally as though you're having to learn to inhabit the body that you've been given. In the sense how to the button presses and what those things can do, and then discover combinations, discover and expand upon what you've been given to achieve new things that initially are completely beyond you. I suppose again what I'm describing there is in fact the evolutionary process to a certain extent, and it feels as though it looks as though. Like waves on a beach, you'll have moments of progress, but then some of that will be lost in the next generation. Then another bit of progress, and bit by bit you'll go higher and higher up the beach. But learning to learn, I think, is the thing that I'm most interested in here. And I mean, I know as we've talked about in the past, your household is definitely a fan of Assassin's Creed, and I think if any of that is linked to the historical setting, this as an opportunity to learn something about the mechanisms of natural selection and evolution is something that I struggle to fully express how excited I am by this as an experience, because it's something that I've been thinking about certainly all my academic life. How things change, what was the impetus to develop consciousness. And we've all wondered, haven't we? How did people learn that food was poisonous? Well, the answer is someone ate it and died. But being able to actually live, experience that through this game it's genuinely interesting. It really is.
We'll look out for it. It sounds fascinating, and as I say, potentially rather wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Brockman. We come to the end of this month's Watching Brief, having had a couple of technological hiccups here and there. So it has been.
But we've evolved. We've evolved through we've learnt from the experience. I've learnt to go back into press Control Alt Delete, kill Skype, and start it again.
Yeah, kill Skype. Try not to murder the computer itself. Yeah, and move on. But as yes, we've made it through this month's watching brief, and I look forward to next month. Thank you as ever for your time. Thank you, folks at home, for your attention. If you have any comments or conversation or anything that you wanted to talk about in the next watching brief in upcoming episodes, please do highlight those news stories and conversations for us. And I suppose, as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.